You guys know what I hate? I hate when I don't get what I want. Like, does anyone else hate when they don't get what they want? Okay, I hate when I don't get what I want. And there's a lot of areas, I suppose, where I have hate for things, but in I think, a justified way. When I don't get what I want, I hate that. And specifically, there's an area of my life that I find myself getting angry or upset about because I don't get what I want on multiple or repeated occasions. And it's in this area of, well, you may know this, but I have a love of sneakers. And so I love shoes, and I love sneakers, and I love buying new sneakers. And so this area of hate is tied to, at times, my inability to get the sneakers that I want because for whatever reason, the app or the website or whatever it is that I'm trying to purchase these things on is occupied by a bunch of other people like me who want to get these shoes, and for whatever reason, it slows down my ability to get these shoes. One app in particular is this app called the Sneakers app, which is owned or operated by Nike. And it's how they release their shoes. And so several months ago, I was on this app it was a Saturday morning, I had set my alarm. I set 2 alarms actually, to get these shoes, not because it was gonna be early, but because I just didn't want to get distracted. So I set one like 15 minutes before the warning, and then one 3 minutes before the shoes were gonna release at 10 a.m. Eastern time to make sure I was ready on the app. So at the 15-minute mark, I got my notification. I was like, okay, I need to go in. So I went into the app and I checked my payment information. I had 2 credit cards on file. I had all the data, like all the information, the address, all of that stuff correct. And then I also set up Apple Pay, which is linked to 2 other cards, if for some reason this app was gonna give me a hard time in getting these shoes. And so I had everything ready to go. 10 a.m. Eastern hits, I see the refresh to buy the shoes, I buy the button or hit the button, and then I'm sitting there with kind of like the spinning wheel of death, right? And it's just like spinning, which is not abnormal. But then it's like 3 minutes in, it's like, okay, something's not right. So then I use a different device because I don't want to close out the app on my phone and screw up my chances of getting these shoes. I use a different device to see if I can check on Twitter and see what's going on, like what's happening right now. Because if this is crashing, then everyone would be talking about it on Twitter. And sure enough, everyone's like talking about, okay, this isn't working, my app's stuck or whatever, it's asking for multiple payment methods. I'm like, I'm set, it got my payment method, it's going through, I should be good. And then like 3 turns to 7, which turns to 10, which turns to 15. Krista's like, hey, are we leaving? Are we going to that thing? And I was like, no, I gotta wait till this app is ready to go. I can't afford to leave my apartment and then move it away from Wi-Fi and that be the thing that kicks it off and prevents us from going. I sat for 25 minutes refreshing this app, only to find out I didn't get the shoes. And I was ticked. Like, I was so mad because I didn't get what I wanted. And I think there's a lot of experiences like that in my life that is probably for my benefit, where it's probably good that I don't get what I want. But you know what we all hate? We all hate, more than not getting what we want, we hate when someone else gets what we wanted, right? We hate when someone else gets the lifestyle that we envision ourselves having. We hate when they get the lifestyle and the apartment we envision ourselves having. And then worse is when they got the lifestyle and the apartment that we wanted because they got the promotion we wanted. And it's like this trifecta or this triumvirate of things that happen, like when someone else is getting something and we see them and we want to be happy for them. We want to celebrate, or part of us knows that's the right thing to do, right? Or a person of good standing or good character would do. But deep down inside of us, there's an aspect of that where it's like, man, why do they get that and I don't? And nowhere else is this as prevalent or is this as maybe damaging or hurtful as in the area of relationships. Because when it comes to positions or material things, apartments, jobs, possessions, positions, all of those things, we can kind of get over that. But when it's someone else experiencing or obtaining what we want for our own relationships, when they have the friend group that we never had, when they had the companion or the partner or the spouse or the love of their lives and then the person of their dreams, when that guy gets the girl of your dreams, like that's where it gets kind of complicated. And when that girl gets the guy of your dreams, that's where it gets a bit discouraging. And maybe it's not just like in a relational or a romantic way, but it's in a companion way. It's in a way where you feel like you want to be connected with someone. You feel like you want to have camaraderie where you look at Instagram or Snapchat or whatever, and on Friday night, everyone else is going out doing stuff, but they're not doing it with you. In fact, they didn't even invite you. You didn't feel like you got connected or a part of that. And nothing else in our lives, in my opinion, has the ability to deeply wound us or sting us as it is so with the lack of significant or meaningful relationships, or maybe there's a surplus or a multitude of failed relationships. And those things wound us to our core. They kind of bury this, they create this pain that we just try to do whatever we can to kind of bury and subdue or move out the way and try to ignore. And it totally makes sense. It makes sense that stuff hurts. It makes sense that those things exist because God created us and he hardwired us for connection and for community. Yeah. And so when we don't have connection and when we don't have community, we start wondering or thinking something must be wrong with me because everyone else has it. Other people have the friends. Other people have the family. Other people have the marriages or the relationships or the fulfillment that you would expect or hope to have or experience in the context of relationship, yet I'm the only one, it feels like I'm the only one that's kind of waving my hands out here and saying, God, where is this in my life? And look, I have a beautiful marriage, I have a great wife, I have a great daughter, I have a great family, and I'm super thankful for that, but this is something that I've experienced even in my own life. Not with the marriage, not within the kids, but in talking about or experiencing like just community and having people to hang out with, having friends that you could just trust. And just be transparent with and say, like, this is where I'm at, this is where I'm struggling, or this is something that's challenging me, and not feel like you're gonna receive or you're gonna be on the receiving end of someone's judgment or kind of, ostracization where they're just gonna kind of like move you out of their life because they don't wanna deal with where you're at. And part of that is, my own doing in a sense, in that like I've moved a lot of different places and we've not lived in for an extended period of time in one location. And so it's hard to build that level of trust and camaraderie and friendship when you're only dwelling in a place for 2 years or a year and a half or whatever it is. Other times, it doesn't matter how long I've lived in some place, it just doesn't seem like there's like something that clicks, with a friend or something that clicks with another person. Like how some people you just meet and you're like, oh, we get it, we get each other, and we're right, or this makes sense. And then other times you're like, well, I know that is possible, but I don't think it's possible for me. And those moments, those experiences, whether they're romantic or whether they're just kind of something in the context of friendship or just regular community, those things end up creating this, not just a feeling or an emotion, but they create or forge an identity. And that identity looks something like this, where we think we're disregarded, we think we're rejected, and we think we're unlovable. It creates this identity that we in turn embrace or carry or put upon ourselves, where we think, well, everyone else has this except for me, or it seems like everyone else can get this except for me, so that must mean that I'm disregarded. It must mean that I'm not valuable. It must mean that I'm not worthy of this. So I am disregarded, not I feel disregarded. It means, well, I've tried with people. I had that relationship. I was dating that one person, or I was in, that one group of people, and then all of a sudden something happened, and it kind of like, fell apart or it collapsed. Maybe by my doing, maybe by someone else's doing, but for whatever reason, I wasn't fully embraced, or I didn't feel like I was actually kind of removed from it. So it wasn't just that I was rejected; it's that I am rejected, that I am not suitable for this. And then ultimately, this last piece of feeling unloved or being unlovable. Well, if everyone else can find love, if everyone else can experience that kind of deep friendship, if everyone else can find that connection, if everyone else can have that except for me, then surely I must be the problem. I must be living my life or existing in such a way that I am completely unlovable or unloved. That's who I am. And then this kind of effect or this kind of situation does a few things, but one of the things that it does is that it actually distracts us. The enemy uses these things to distract us, not just from who God is, but what God says. And if he can distract us, then he can cause us to divert our focus and our attention. And if we divert our focus, or if we lose our focus on the truth of who God is or the truth of what God says, then we lose our hope. And if we lose our hope, then we lose our motivation to continue in that way. And so we get to this point where we're talking about, this is who I am. And it leaves us just kind of asking that question, like, God, do you see me down here? We started this series last week with this whole idea that every person in every situation, or not every situation in life, but every person at some point in their life finds themselves in a situation where they're kind of throwing their hands up and just asking, like, God, do you see me? Do you see what's happening in my life? Do you see what's not happening in my life? Do you see the frustration, the longing, the burden, the pressure that I'm experiencing, and yet I'm stuck in a place where I don't have the experience or the opportunity, it seems like, to engage in any of these things? And relationships and love is the one that kind of sticks the most, Because in our minds and in our hearts and in our spirits, we know we were created to be loved and to express love. And then when it feels like we don't have that opportunity, or it feels like others don't want to receive our love, nor are they interested in showing us love, and we feel like, God, something's messed up. You created me. You made me in this way. You made me for this desire. And the enemy creeps in and says, well, if God made you for this, yet he's not provided it for you, well, then surely he doesn't see you. And if he doesn't see you, then he doesn't care about you. And I think one of the things about this is that, like, it's, again, just like we talked about last week, it's not new. It's existed as long as you and I, or humanity, has existed. This feeling and longing for connection, but yet wrestling with the pressure or our inability to find it in a meaningful or substantive way. And there's this epic story in the scriptures of a person who encountered this, who went through the highs and lows of relationships, who felt the successes and then the burdens that came when something didn't go right. There's a person who kind of navigated this circumstance, or navigated a series of circumstances in which relationships mattered, yet at the same time, this person felt completely alone. At the same time, this person would have felt disregarded. At the same time, this person would have felt rejected. And at the same time, this person would have questioned whether they were worthy of being loved. And today, what I want to do is I want to share this person's story with you. And I want to talk through this person's story, and her name is Ruth. And Ruth is an interesting person. Ruth is an interesting character because Ruth is someone who maybe you've heard the name, but you don't really have the piece or the full picture of who she is or what she navigated through. And so I want to go back and just kind of talk through her story. But before we can talk about her story, we have to kind of talk about where her story originated, at least in a scriptural context. It started with a guy named Elimelech. And Elimelech was a Judean guy. He lived in ancient Israel about 3,000 years ago. And he lived in the city of Bethlehem, which is about 5 to 7 miles south of modern-day Jerusalem. And at the time Elimelech was married, he was married to a woman named Naomi, and he had 2 sons. And we're told that during his time in Bethlehem, there came a very severe drought, a very severe famine, so severe, in fact, that the people were struggling to not just make ends meet, but struggling to find food to feed their families and put on their table. And so like any man, he did what, any reasonable person would do. It's, let me see where there's food. Let me find out where I can go, where someone can provide a solution. And he heard about a place to the east called Moab. And in this city, or in this region of Moab, they weren't affected by the drought. They weren't affected by the famine. And things were good. So Elimelech decides, I'm going to pack up my family. I'm going to take my wife Naomi. I'm going to take my 2 boys, and I'm going to move us east to Moab. They arrive to Moab, and unfortunately, things don't get really better for the family. Yes, they have food, but we're told Elimelech actually loses his life. He passes away. And so leaving just Naomi and her 2 boys. Her boys grow up, they become men, and then they decide it's time for them to get married. And so they marry 2 Moabite women. One named Orpah. Maybe you read it in the Bible and you thought it said Oprah, and you were like, wow, I didn't know Oprah was in the Bible. But it's not Oprah, it's Orpah. And so Orpah is one of the women that gets married, and then Ruth is the second one that gets married. And so these 2 women, Orpah and Ruth, end up marrying Elimelech's sons, and they live with Naomi. They live in this kind of communal family society, and so they get married. They're part of Naomi's family. And after about 10 years of marriage, we're told very little about what's actually taken place. In fact, here's what we know. We know they were married for 10 years. We know there was no kind of patriarch of the household. But then we also know that neither wife could produce or bear any children. And as if that weren't burdensome or significant enough, because I would imagine as a woman who's married, whose desire is to have children, is to raise a family, as if that wasn't difficult or burdensome enough, we're told that about 10 years after they get married, not one of the sons, but both of the sons tragically die, leaving Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah alone to kind of figure out this mess. And imagine yourself in Ruth's situation. Imagine here you are, a young person, you meet someone that you think is going to be the love of your life, that you're going to spend the rest of your days with, that you're going to be able to grow up with, that you're going to be able to raise a family with. And you realize the grief or the tragedy that this person's father and your kid's eventual grandfather is not going to be a part of the picture. But 10 years after being married, you still are incapable of starting the family that you envisioned or that you dreamed of. But you're holding out hope because, listen, maybe they got married really young, and so maybe 10 years into it, they're just in their late 20s or early 30s. And so they're not old by any stretch of the imagination, so there's still hope or prospects that, yes, we can have this to come. But then your husband passes away, and your husband dies, and you're left to wonder, what do I do now? How do I go back? How do I kind of restart, or how do I reset my life, or how do I move forward? And Naomi, of all people, loses her husband and then loses her two sons. And now she's left with no heir. She's left with no grandchildren. She's left with no one to carry the family legacy. Naomi, after a time period, decides, you know what? Maybe it's just best for me to go back to Bethlehem. She hears that things have turned around. Bethlehem's okay. So she decides she's going to move back, because why live in a region where you have no family, you have no connections, you have no community? It's time for me to pack back up and go back to where I came from. Maybe something else can be offered there. So she does this. She decides she's going to move, but she decides to Orpah and Ruth that it would be unfair for them to go with her because they are young. They could still get married. They could still find hope. They could still find, family and fulfillment and relational significance that they deserve, that they needed, that they crave. So she gives them the offering to say, you know what? You go back to your families. You go back to your places of origin. You decide, move on with your life. Don't be stuck or confounded by me or confined to me in my life and where I live. Orpah decides, okay, I'll take that offer. And Orpah decides that she's going to go. But Ruth, on the other hand, decided that she would not leave Naomi's side. In fact, we're told that Ruth actually said to Naomi, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you die is where I will die. And wherever you live is where I will live. I will stay by your side, Naomi, no matter how long, no matter how far, no matter how far away it takes me from where I'm from. I will be by your side. And so she goes and moves to this foreign region. I don't know if she spoke the language. I don't know if she knows the customs, but she moves to this foreign region to live and dwell with Naomi. It's there that they arrive, and again, you think, well, maybe something will trigger, maybe something will turn, but things actually don't get better. Yes, Bethlehem is no longer in a drought. Yes, Bethlehem is no longer in a famine, but Naomi and Ruth have nothing of inheritance, have nothing of wealth, have no fortune, aren't breadwinners in their families, and so Ruth is left to make this kind of humbling decision and decide that she's going to take up the practice or the custom of gleaning. And gleaning is not something that we think of or something that we're aware of. It's a word we use in our vernacular, but it's not necessarily something we depict or tie back to what its origins was. Gleaning was a tradition and a practice in which a farmer, or harvesters, I should say, in the time of harvest, would take their crops. And as they were harvesting their crops, if something fell to the ground, rather than picking that crop back up and placing in your basket, you were required or expected to leave it on the ground so that the needy people in the community, the poorer people in the community, could come by and pick up what was dropped as a means of providing and taking care of themselves. It was a practice of deliberate surplus in a sense of just being able to say, you know what, we have enough here on the vine. We have enough crops here that we can pluck from, but the people who don't have anything need something, and this is a way for us to provide for them and to take care of the less fortunate in our community. This is where Ruth found herself. So poor, so desperate, so incapable of providing for anything that she says, you know what, the best decision for me is to go out into a field and hope I can pick up someone else's scraps. Again, put yourself in this situation. This is not the life a young 13, 15, 17-year-old Ruth envisioned for herself. It's not the life a 21, 29-year-old version of Ruth would have envisioned for herself. To be begging for someone else's surplus, to be hoping that someone else accidentally makes a mistake. Yet she goes out to a field, and it turns out she goes to this field and there's enough, and she works hard, and she goes, but she catches the attention of the owner of the field, a man by the name of Boaz. And Boaz is a person of prominence, a person of significance in this region, in this city of Bethlehem. And Boaz approaches her, noticing a foreigner, says, who are you? Get some information about her. And then finds out or realizes that she's actually been the daughter-in-law of Naomi, who happens to be a distant relative of his. And so he honors and acknowledges her commitment and her faithfulness and her loyalty to his relative. And he tells her, listen, you can come to my field anytime. I'll make sure my people, my foremen, take care of you and provide anything you need. Don't worry about going elsewhere and risking attack. risking, being jeopardized. Because listen, we know today we live in a very privileged world, but this was a time when women were both disenfranchised and disadvantaged. So taking a risk to go into someone's field and working with men in a field was also a risk of vulnerability and potential assault or even worse. So Boaz says, listen, you come here, my people will take care of you, you will be safe, you will be protected, and you will have all that you need. So Ruth, grabs all this food, this grain, this crop, whatever. She brings it back, and Naomi is like, how did you get so much? How did you find so much on the ground? And she's like, well, a friend kind of hooked me up. I didn't have to pick this all off of the ground. He just kind of provided a surplus. And she's like, where did you go? She says, it was to the field of a man named Boaz. And immediately Naomi just kind of has this revelation, and she realizes, wow, this is a family member, but it's not just any family member. It's a family member who's been designated as a kinsman redeemer, a family redeemer. Again, another traditional custom was that when a man would pass away and there was no one to receive, he didn't have a son to pass on his legacy or his inheritance or his provisions, that someone in the family or several someones in the family would be designated as family redeemers. And it would be their responsibility, they would have the opportunity, to purchase or acquire those possessions. And in the process of acquiring those possessions, it was stated that if there was a daughter or if there was a lady capable of producing children, that someone would be entitled to marry her, someone from the family would have to marry her and give her the opportunity to give birth to a son so that she could pass on her family's inheritance to her own lineage versus that lineage being taken by someone else. So Boaz serves in that role for this family. And so Naomi kind of comes up with a scheme and says, you know what, Ruth, you need to get married. You need to have a relationship. You need to be with someone. You deserve this, Ruth. And so you should marry Boaz. And so she comes up with this kind of a weird plan, I'll call it. Pretty awkward, not gonna lie. Here's what she tells her. Boaz is going to be working down on kind of this threshing floor area in the evening. He's going to work so hard that he's going to want to go to sleep right there. What you need to do is you need to dress up, you need to put on your best perfume, and you need to kind of hide in a creeper way off to the side where he doesn't see you and doesn't know that you're there. Once he falls asleep, go ahead and uncover his feet and then lay down and put your feet next to his. It's weird. And so you're going to go do this, and then when he wakes up, you tell him, hey, you're a family redeemer, and I'd love to marry you. Now, I don't know how things happened back then, but from what I know today, if I would have waited for Krista to propose to me and ask me to marry her, we would have never been married. Because my custom and my tradition is the guy is supposed to ask the girl to marry her, not lay down by someone's feet when they wake up, tell them you're supposed to marry them, and then hope it all turns out okay. Now, I don't know if you do research or whatever, but if you research and if you study why the uncovering of the feet, there's literally zero clear answer. It can be anything from, what you'll find anything from, hey, when someone's feet is out of the blanket, they get cold, which wakes them up. Or it could be something like a sexual innuendo. The range of all this is bizarre, but here's the point. Nobody knows. So why did Naomi tell her to do that? We don't really know. But Ruth says, okay, I'll do exactly as you told me to do. Ruth shows up to the threshing floor. She hides incognito, waits till he falls asleep, does the plan according to what Naomi said. Boaz wakes up. He's startled because he didn't go to sleep next to a woman, but now he's awoken next to a woman. And he's like, what are you doing here? And she explains to him, you're my family redeemer. We're supposed to get married. I need you to go take care of this. And he says, you know what? You've been very faithful. You've been honest to your family. And I understand my responsibility to this. So let me go sort this thing out and see what I'm supposed to do about it. She comes back to Naomi. Naomi's curious. So what happened? Girl talk. Was he nice? How are his feet? All the casual things you would ask when someone does something weird like that. And Ruth tells her, listen, Naomi, he's got to go sort things out because he doesn't know what he's supposed to do in this moment or at this time. And Naomi just tells her, just wait patiently, my dear. Just wait patiently. He'll get it figured out. Things will be sorted out. We come near to the end of Ruth's story. Boaz goes, finds out there's actually a closer relative who is in relation and serving as a family redeemer, approaches him about what they're supposed to be done, and he says he can't do it. He can't fulfill the obligation to purchase and acquire the property or whatever it is that they have. And so Boaz is set up to become the family redeemer. So he and Ruth get married, they have kids, and they live happily ever after. Incredible story. In about, 10 minutes? And so Ruth has this very kind of unique situation or unique circumstance. And in the course of Ruth's story, what you find is that there's these incredible highs and lows. A high of, I got married. I'm going to spend the rest of my life with someone. A low of, oh no, I can't give birth to a son. And the pressure's on me because my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law, they can't have children either. And so now it's up to me to do this. And she prays and begs, I'm sure, and asks God for a son. And instead of getting a son, she ends up losing her husband. And so she's left with nothing. Naomi says, hey, listen, I love you, but I got to go. It's time for me to move on. Ruth looks around and says, I've given up everything to be a part of this family. I might as well go with you. She moves to a foreign land. She arrives there. They don't have any resources, any means. And so she decides, I'm just going to beg. I'm just going to go to a field, and I'm just going to hope someone drops something, pick it up and see. And so she's at a low, and then all of a sudden she meets someone who takes interest in her and who recognizes her and who acknowledges her commitment. And so, okay, well, here's a guy that's nice and he's treating me good. And there's a hope, maybe not even of marriage or relationship, but just a hope that, okay, well, maybe someone somewhere sees me. And so she tells her family, she tells Naomi. Naomi's like, hey, this is the guy. He's supposed to marry you or whatever. He's the family redeemer. You need to approach this. She goes, she does this weird plan where she puts her feet next to his. He wakes up and he doesn't say, okay, I'll marry you on the spot, which I don't know who would have thought that, but I've got to go take care of some stuff. And he leaves to kind of go sort out the legal matter that's at hand. And now she's left with waiting. Like, I had these high hopes. I had these high expectations. Maybe this was going to work out. And all of a sudden, he walked away. Like, when you are kind of interested in someone? And so you send a text to them. Like, hey, let's go hang out. Or, hey, what are you up to? And it takes them like 3 days to text you back. And those 3 days in between, you're like, do they not like me? Do they like me? Are we friends? Are we not friends? Are we going to hang out? Are we not going to hang out? Did I just get ghosted? How long before you're officially ghosted? Right? Like, what's the rule on that? Is it 24 hours? What's the metric before I determine this person is not interested? Like, all these questions, all these thoughts go through Ruth's mind, and she's left to figure out what's going on. And then ultimately, she gets married. She ends up getting pregnant. She ends up having a son. And the rest is kind of history, so to speak. But I think in Ruth's life, what you find is that there were seasons or moments or opportunities where she would have felt disregarded, where she would have felt, unloved, where she would have felt like rejected, that someone or no one is interested in me. And I think what we realize in Ruth's life is that she went through experiences that many of us can relate to at different points, but there was something different about Ruth. In fact, within the ups and downs of this, there are principles that kind of jump off the page in a way that help us reveal what we can do or how we can navigate this kind of tumultuous experience of wondering and questioning, am I lovable? Have I been rejected? Am I disregarded? God, do you see me? And if we can kind of navigate or apply these principles, what we'll find is that yes, God sees us. Yes, God cares about us. And yes, God is working to orchestrate something for our good and for our benefit, not just in the future, not just off in some distant time, but for the here and now today. And so I'm going to share these things real quick because I told a long time for the story. But here's the first thing that kind of stands out about Ruth's life, okay? First is this: you got to see what you have, not what you don't have. You got to see what you have, not what you don't have. Think about when Naomi offered her that. Think about Ruth, the difference between Ruth and Orpah. Naomi says, listen, you don't have husbands. You don't have kids. I don't have any family to offer you. Just go back home. Orpah says, you're right, I don't have anything. I need to go back home. Ruth says, no, Naomi, I've got you. You're what I have. I don't have a husband. I don't have a father-in-law. I don't have kids. But Naomi, I've got you. I've got something, and that something is meaningful. That something is valuable. You see, what happens is when we look at what we don't have, the relationships we're missing, the friends we don't have, the community we don't have, the spouse that we don't have, when we have all these things that we look at and we say, well, that's missing, and that's missing, it forces us or makes us incapable of actually seeing what we have right in our hands and right in our disposal. That God has given us something. And it may not be the exact thing that we wanted. It may not be the exact thing that we envisioned, but it's something, and that something is significant. And that something will lead to something prosperous. Because if Ruth would have ignored what she had, she would have missed out on what God wanted to bring her.
Yeah. Wow, that's good.
If she would have walked away from Naomi, she would have not considered what she had, then she would have missed out on what God had. You see, we miss out on what God has because we're only concentrating on what we don't have. And as long as you continue to focus on what you don't have, you'll never be able to truly appreciate what you actually do have. The second thing Naomi did was this. She practiced humility, not self-pity. Humility, not self-pity. She moved to a foreign country where she would end up begging and kind of looking on the ground for food in a very literal way, but you never once see or read any incident of like, woe is me. How is this my life? How did I get here, God? I'm sure she asked. I'm sure she felt that way, but she didn't remain stuck there. She practiced humility. You know how much humility it takes to get up one day? Naomi didn't instruct her to do this. She came to Naomi and said, Naomi, this is what I'm going to do for us. You know how much humility it takes to say, you know what? These are the circumstances of my life. They're less than ideal. They're not favorable. They don't feel good. But you know what? I can sit here in self-pity and say, well, I'm 32 and I'm not married. Or I'm 26 and I'm not in my dream job. Or I'm 44 and I've been through 3 divorces. We could sit here and wallow in self-pity. But a humble person recognizes this might be the state of my life today, but it doesn't have to be the state of my life tomorrow. Right. Humility is the key to move from the place of where you are to the place you want to be. Self-pity is a trap. Well, I don't have this, I don't have that. Look at this. I thought by now I'd have this. And yet it was her humility, once again, that led to God's provision. That led to the person, in this case, that God wanted to bring into her life that would ultimately lead to fulfillment, meaning, connection, community, all of those things. So it wasn't just the self-pity, it was the humility, but then there's this third piece. She had to step in faith. You have to step in faith and not get stuck in fear. Now, what I mean by this is that she had to trust what Naomi was instructing her to do in terms of go down to this place, he's going to fall asleep, lay down next to him, uncover his feet. She just kind of took Naomi at her word. And she said, okay, I'll do exactly as you instructed. Now, me, on the other hand, I'm like, oh, no, that's stupid. I am not doing that. I don't like people's feet. I don't want to be anywhere near their feet. I don't want to see their feet because what if I see his feet and then I don't want to get married to him? Like, that's none of my business. That's too soon. Like, I don't need to go there just yet. But sometimes, we get stuck in our fears, don't we? We get caught up in like, what other people are going to think about me? What are other people going to assume or believe about this decision or this action? How are people going to respond? How are they going to, perceive what I'm doing? Or what if this doesn't work out? What if I tried that? What if I did this? What if this doesn't, end up coming out this way or end up working out this way? When Chris and I dated, we dated for just over 2 years, and a portion of that was long distance. I was living in Florida and she was living in Washington State. And then a portion of our distance was actually broken off where she dumped me, and that was a mistake, biggest mistake of her life. We were broken off. We weren't together. And there was a time where she reached out to me and just said, what if you just came here and we just kind of did like one last ditch effort, like a weekend, like 4 days or whatever, to try to sort through things, figure it out, and see if we can make it work. And I remember thinking, like, that's really stupid. That's really dumb. Like, you're telling me I've got to pay for a plane ticket, and you want me to stay at your parents' place like that when you've probably been talking bad about me to them for however long we've been broken up, and then try to see if we work this out, and then, like, fingers crossed it does, but if not, realistically, like, I'm going to go back home and everyone's going to look at me like I'm nuts. So I remember talking with my best friend, Chase, and I was like, Chase, what do you think? We were driving back from the gym, and I was like, what do you think I should do, man? And he's like, bro, you're crazy if you do it, but it's your choice. And I was like, I'd rather be crazy. Like, I'd rather be a little bit crazy and leave no stone unturned and hope it does, just know for sure it's not going to work out, then wonder, like, what if I had taken that risk? So I did. I booked tickets. I jumped on a plane, flew out there, and we spent 4 days together. And it was like clear, like, yes, we've got some stuff to work through, but yes, we're supposed to be together. And that fear would have kept me stuck and would have caused me to miss out on the greatest blessing of my life. But it was the faith and the belief that maybe God wanted me to do this. God was leading me toward this. And fear will keep us from moving out in faith. This final principle I'll share with you is simply this. You have to apply patience, not pressure. Single people, let me talk to you for a minute. Let me holler at you. When something doesn't go right, when something doesn't work out, don't force it. Don't jump the gun and say, okay, well, I've got to get this resolved, or I got to jump to this conclusion. Well, I'm not married by this age, or I don't have this achievement set up. I've got to jump to something. I've got to do something. I've got to make this work. I've got to apply pressure. I've got to, create something, because if not, everyone's going to look and think something's wrong or broken with me. Don't do it. Naomi told her, wait patiently. It'll get sorted out. Married people, let's have real talk. Things go wrong. Things get rocky. All of a sudden, it's like a hotbed for pressure. Well, if you don't change this by this date, if this doesn't change by this date, if you don't quit that job by this time, if this doesn't flip or whatever, then I'm out, or I can't do this anymore. But if we could just learn to kind of flip the script, if we could just learn to say, you know what, instead of applying pressure, I'm just going to apply patience. This may not be the scenario. This may not be the situation I want. This may not turn out the way I envision. But if we can just apply patience to work through the situation and trust that in God's timing and in God's way, the right things are going to fall into place and come about at the right time and in the way that I need them, or the way that I be prepared to receive them, then I can see and experience the goodness of God in my life and in this area. But it requires that we stop applying pressure to ourselves and to others and start applying patience. Now, all of this is really good, and all of this is helpful, but there is this reality of yes, I get it, but what about now? I still feel unloved because someone didn't magically walk through the door and answer that. I still feel uncertain because I don't have the community or the connection. How can I know that God sees me in this? How do I know that God is going to, provide or fulfill or come through in a way? And the answer to that kind of response, or that kind of question, to me is simple. It's found back at the beginning of Ruth's story. Look at this in Ruth chapter 1, verse 4. The sons married who? Moabite women. Okay. Now this may not mean much to you, but let me explain something to you. Okay. Moabite people were an offspring. Let's go back further. Okay, you had Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham had a nephew named Lot. These are the patriarchs, the forefathers of all things Hebrew, Israel, all that stuff. Okay, he had a nephew named Lot. Lot, in a drunken fiasco, ended up getting one of his daughters pregnant. The offspring of Lot's incestual relationship with his daughter were the Moabite people. So, paraphrase or kind of rephrase this for you. Moabite people in the Hebrew culture were unloved, rejected, and disregarded. So when God spoke to a woman named Ruth and said, Ruth, I see you. I'm going to pluck you from this situation where you have been unloved, where you have been rejected, where you have been disregarded, and I'm going to move you into a situation where through your lineage, not just your son will come, but my son Jesus will come to show love to the rest of the world. When God did that for Ruth, a Moabite woman, what he was saying is, I'm setting this up for every single person in this room, every single person watching online, every single person listening to the podcast to experience and receive my love through my son, Jesus Christ. Wow. And if God, in his goodness, was working 3,000 plus years ago to pave a way so that you today could experience his love, do you believe that 5 years from now, 5 months from now, it's possible that God would bring someone or a group of someone's into your life to experience that in a tangible, physical way? Not just a spiritual way, but in a tangible, physical way. This is the goodness of God, that he would take someone who is unloved, who is rejected, who is disregarded, and use that person to show us how regarded we are, how accepted we are, and how loved we are. This is the good news of Jesus. And this is the hope that we can carry with us from today.